Most people see politics on election day, but the signs, the speeches, the victory parties, but the real work, that happens long before the cameras show up. It happens in call time, in field plans, in donor spreadsheets, in the quiet panic of a first time candidate wondering if they're about to lose everything. Campaigns are built in invisible rooms, and tonight's guest knows every one of them. She's worked field, fundraising, management, operations, communications, from million-dollar races with national attention to volunteer-led school board campaigns with no staff at all. She built a consulting firm not to preserve the old political playbook, but to break it. Because if democracy is going to survive, it can't just belong to the people who already know how the game works. Tonight, we talk about power. Who gets it? Who keeps it? And who's finally learning how to take it back. This is Hold 'em Accountable. Our guest tonight is Eva Posner, founder and CEO of Evinco Strategies, a fully remote, women-led consulting firm focused on helping progressive candidates, campaigns, and organizations win. Since launching the firm in 2016, Eva has built a team with more than 110 years of combined political experience across fields, fundraising, operations, communications, and campaign management. She's what I like to call a political mechanic. She's worked on everything from no budget school board races to million-dollar campaigns that grab national headlines. Her focus has consistently been on first-time candidates, diverse representation, and local races where policy hits closest to home. Before politics, she worked as a journalist covering government and human trafficking. And she brings that same investigative instinct into campaign strategy, asking what voters actually care about and how movements build lasting power. She earned her journalism degree from the University of Tennessee. Ava has been so outspoken about something this industry rarely admits. Politics has a burnout problem. And if we want sustainable movements, we have to stop treating exhaustion like a badge of honor. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain, not on who wins, but on how. Ava, welcome to Hold 'em Accountable.
Thanks so much for having me. Quick question. Have you run for office? Because that
Yes.
introduction sounded like you understand that anxiety well.
I ran for Congress in 24.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you know that experience well. All right. That explains something. I was like, "Oh, this guy knows what he's talking about." He felt that. He felt that with his chest.
Oh, yeah. You've said politics has a serious burnout problem. Why does this industry keep rewarding exhaustion instead of sustainability?
I mean, I think it's a lot of different factors. The first is just like the nature of elections is that they're cyclical. Which means that you have slow times and then you have really, really on times. And that makes it really difficult to build like sustainable businesses or sustainable careers on it because you don't just need to eat. Every 2 years after Labor Day, you need a paycheck all the time. So the whole idea is like, it economically function the same way as a real job, right? And it is absolutely a real job. It is a very it can be very physically demanding. Depending on what part of the campaign you're on, it has a ton of necessary skill sets to be able to actually function and do a good job. But it is difficult to build something that will pay your bills all the time. And I think that's like the number one factor is the fact it is that like if you can't have economic security, if you're not safe, if you're not providing for your family, then you're having this space of like constant panic in your nervous system. What am I going to do next? And it makes it really hard to stay in this for a long time. I think that's a big piece of it. Another big piece of it, I think, is the age difference. The reality is that campaigns are fueled by young people. But the shots are called, and in large scale by old guys in smoke-filled rooms on K Street in DC, and they just don't know or care, what the experience is. In particular, a lot of them, I mean, shit, you got people making these decisions who haven't actually been on a campaign since we, like, I don't know, got computers, right? And so they don't understand all of the different ways that it's now multimodal. You have to be everywhere all at once all the time, and the demands of the job are just they either don't know or they don't care what it is, because who cares if you abuse young people, right? Or like, that's it's a very capitalistic mindset behind it. And then I think, there's just there's the emotional factor, right? Like, it feels, even in previous years, when you do this work, it feels like the world is falling apart. It feels like democracy is on your shoulders, and that weight is not healthy, and it is encouraged and taken advantage of in order to pay people less, in order to work them more hours, in order to, convince them that they, like, if they leave the campaign office to go see their grandma who's dying in the hospital, they're a bad person, as opposed to, taking a step back from that and creating something that can hold itself up while someone takes a break, or um allows people to put a little bit of distance behind themselves. There's a lot of emotional manipulation in, politics at writ large, but, I think specifically in the progressive space, there's, a martyr complex. And it's just like all of those factors really just end up making it so, you have to be damn near psychotic, or, wealthy or, like, economically stable from some other source in order to do this work long term.
A lot of first time candidates think campaigns are just about charisma. You've worked with the machinery behind the scenes. What actually wins elections that most outsiders completely misunderstand?
Yeah, so I mean, you nailed that. They think it's charisma. First time candidates think that they're gonna have some kind of Jed Bartlett moment or AOC moment, a Bernie rally. Like, people are gonna walk, they're gonna walk in the room and people are gonna cheer for them, and there are gonna be all these signs, and it's gonna be, press conferences and glamour. And in reality, the running for office is actually just like being on the phone for like 2 years, asking people to do things for you. Like, you're asking them for money, you're asking them to volunteer, you're asking them for their vote, you're asking them for endorsements. You're just, you're kind of like, flailing open your own soul and just begging people to help you constantly, and that, I think, goes against people's pride, which is why it's not something that they, like, understand. The other thing is that it's a huge lifestyle change, and people don't see that either, and actually I think that's a huge failure that, politics, again, writ large, but like the left side in particular really fails people on this, because there's a lot of candidate recruitment efforts. There's a lot of, like, run for the seat, we've got your back, we've got your back, we've got your back. First of all, no, they don't. Secondly, they're just gonna push you off a cliff by yourself, and then you're not gonna know which way is up, and there's not always somebody there to help you. But they didn't warn you that it's running for office is a lifestyle change. It's like buying a house or getting married or getting a dog. Like, it's a big life decision that impacts your day-to-day life for somewhere between, 6 months and forever, depending on how successful you are and, what decisions you make. But it impacts your ability to do your day job. It impacts your own finances. It impacts your family relationships. It impacts your ability to, like, show up for your kids or your parents, whoever you're caretaking. It impacts your ability to get health care. It impacts your ability to, like, eat 3 meals a day from healthy sources. Like, it really, like, messes with day-to-day life. Is something that I think is hidden from candidates a lot of times, because the party is scared, the movement is scared that if people understand how hard it is, they won't run. But I think I tend to take the opposite approach, is that if people don't understand how hard it is, they're more likely to fail. They're more likely to make bad decisions. And frankly, I would rather somebody not run and like understand that, like, this isn't the way that they need to show up for democracy, than to ruin their life by running, and that is something that I see happen sometimes too. So it's just understanding the lifestyle choice and then understanding that, like, there is no more humbling experience and there's no pride in this situation. Like, the glamour is approximately 10% of it, and the rest is being shoved in a closet with a list full of phone numbers and told and calling them and asking them for whatever the resource it is that you need. You need time, you need money, and you need people. You can always get more time, you can always get more money, you can never get I mean, excuse me, you can always get more people, you can always get more money, you can never get more time. The clock is always running out. And so, I think that is, like, the biggest misunderstanding is just how much of it is essentially, strategic begging and then data tracking.
You specialize in helping first time candidates and candidates from diverse backgrounds who often face barriers to entry. What are the biggest invisible barriers people don't see?
Oh, man, that's a great question. I would say I think it's kind of a couple of different things wrapped into one, but the concept of viability is in itself a barrier. And it is something that, has been defined by old straight white dudes for old straight white dudes and their ability to, bring together the resources necessary to win. There are really, like, industry standard ways of measuring viability that, like, include, polling that may or may not actually accurately reflect name ID. The idea that, like, you have to raise the most money, which just fundamentally isn't true. You have to raise enough money, but you do not have to raise the most money. We've won several elections where we're outspent. You're going to be all right. How endorsements work and whether or not, and going for every single endorsement under the sun without understanding that, like, actually, some endorsements don't mean shit to anybody. A lot of endorsements don't come with anything, and you're wasting your time unless you're able to use them strategically. And, like, there's also this, like, whisper network part of it that is just essentially viability being defined by whether or not the political insiders know you and like you. And that is completely not reflective of the reality of the voters, because the more time you spend in politics, the less normal of a human being you are. And, like, it would behoove us, I think, as an industry and a movement for everybody who's been doing it for a long time, to sit back, take some humble pie, and understand that just because they know or like somebody doesn't mean the voters give a shit. And so it's this concept of viability, I think, is, like, the biggest barrier. And sometimes, a lot of times, 80% of the time it shows up in fundraising, but it can also show up in these other spaces, like money and like endorsements and insider relationships.
You've worked on everything from school board races to $1 million campaigns. Why do you believe local races matter more than most people realize?
Because local politics, local races are where your day-to-day quality of life comes from. Whether or not you have a grocery store where you can get fresh, affordable food, whether or not you have a pharmacy that you can get, affordable medication, whether or not you have to drive an hour or 3 hours to go to the hospital, whether or not you have your roads flood, or, you have tree limbs that are falling on your power lines, whether or not your children's education has any kind of quality to it. Um, all of those things and so many more, we could do an entire podcast on just that, are run at the local or state level in a vast majority of situations. Congress doesn't fix housing. Congress doesn't fix transportation. Like, I know it's a sexy race, but I really wish fewer people would run for Congress. It's just, why? But anyway, it's not, where the rubber meets the road. Where the rubber meets the road is your local elected officials. And then, more than even beyond that, like, your local elected officials understand what your life looks like. They might not be 100% relatable, but, like, they have driven through your community. They know, like, they know your schools, they know your community leaders. They have some sense of your reality in a way that national elected officials literally never will. Love him or hate him, Donald Trump didn't come knock on your door. Neither did Kamala. And at the end of and even if they did, like, they're pre-screened Secret Service things that are, like, done for a photo op, right? They're not actual voter communication. Whereas you might see your mayor at church on Sunday and have the ability to just be like, "Hey, Bob, did you fill that pothole yet? It keeps taking out my tires and it's, costing me hundreds of dollars." So you have the most influence at the local level with your electeds, and then vice versa, the electeds have the most influence over your quality of life at the local level. And so that is where my heart is local politics. And also I just believe that the federal government is irreparably broken, and I see no evidence otherwise. So it just doesn't seem like a great use of my time when at this period in history, I see my job as harm mitigation, right? Campaigns are not where the revolution is fought, but they are where we can solve problems for, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people at a time to try to protect people. And that's where I'm at this moment.
In states like Indiana, who have a Republican supermajority in the House and in the Senate, state House, state Senate, um, most counties are deep red.
Mhm.
Um, but we have a dynamic group of Democratic candidates the past two election terms. How would you face in Indiana?
I mean, I would start first off, it's gonna take years, and these are my favorite, okay? The blue on blue violence, I moved away from that on purpose. I love like, the deep red, like, "Let's fight the Confederates" energy, like, I'm really into that. So I just wanna start with, like, this is, like, a decade of work or more, right? Let's start there. Secondly, you have to start at the most basic levels. You have to start by building your Democratic County Central Committees and your Democratic County parties, getting people involved in the county party process, getting people to understand the machinations of campaigns and like build the behavior of getting used to showing up and volunteering and making slow and steady progress. And then you also have to have candidates, these dynamic crops of candidates who are running and doing great work and being great warriors for the message. What's happening after they're losing? Are they turning around and giving up? Or are they turning around and going, okay, great, I ran for Congress, that didn't work out. Let me turn around and take all this name ID and goodwill I just bought and try like a school board race, right? Go further down the ballot and use the infrastructure that they've already built. And this is my big passion is infrastructure and movement building. Make sure when you are running for office, win, lose, or draw, that you are tracking your data, you are tracking your list, you're keeping everything clean, and you have it somewhere where you can turn around and use it again and again and again. And you may not use it yourself, right? You may never run for office again, but maybe they're trying to put a data center in your backyard or a toxic waste dump, and you need to organize people against that. That's those lists of volunteers and donors and people who are engaged. That's where that comes from. So I think it is, turning around, running for the local offices, making sure that when you get one win, that person turns around and says, okay, great, and endorses another person for another seat on that same, like that seat, that message worked. All right, let's go. Let's do it again. And being willing and able to have consistent but slow and steady progress. Also picking issue areas, advocating for building a new school or against a data center, those kinds of things, against ICE detention facilities, those things that get activists really worked up, making sure that in those moments you're capturing their contact information. You're making sure those folks are registered to vote and they're not just, showing up because they're pissed about this one issue. And then consistent outreach, not only to that list of like volunteers and candidates and like infrastructure folks that you're missing or that you're building, but also to, the registered Democrats in the state. Don't just show up once every 4 years. In particular, when you are in a sacrificial lamb situation and everybody knows it, find ways to engage year round. And it doesn't have to be like something that's a huge cost, it can be something that is potlucks or I don't know, afternoons at the church or nonprofit work or something like that. You can organize in PTA meetings, you can organize everywhere. And so the day-to-day opportunities to make sure that you just keep talking to people and keep it moving, I think is the biggest piece. And then determination to not give up, because it is going to take a really long time. And then also not gatekeeping. I think that's a big secret to this too, is that you'll have an old guard or a class, cohort of people. I consider myself the 2014 cohort in San Diego politics. I'm in Virginia now, but like there was a class of us who came up together and we did everything together because we were on these campaigns together and it was our first big cycle. And I just was back in San Diego last week and it was amazing how quickly like we all circled the wagons and like we're, again, like, okay, we're gonna run for these offices, we're gonna do these things, we're gonna do this, whatever. And that's great. But then you also have to turn around and make sure that you're not locking other people out of your plans. So making sure that you're engaging with the new folks who show up and you don't just look at them with side eye. Making sure that you are teaching the actual political and campaign skills to the young people. One of the things that also contributes to the burnout that I didn't think about earlier, but I is a real factor, is the fact that no one politics is a dirty industry, and it is an industry full of people who are trying to build power for themselves and are not always interested in sharing it with other people. And so when someone new comes in and says, "Hey, can you help me figure this out?" A lot of the times the answer is no, and they slam the door in your face. And it requires an incredible amount of determination. And then also all those economic factors we were talking about earlier to stay in the game when you're constantly being told you're too young, you don't know what's going on, you're not from around here, blah, 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 blah. Instead of people accepting new energy and accepting that, like, okay, maybe they don't know everything and there's some things you have to teach them, but also maybe they're looking at some of this shit with fresh eyeballs and you can learn from them as well. And so just treating people with some basic respect, particularly, I think in an uphill battle, deep red situation, like you guys are in, making sure that you're not cutting off your nose to spite your face.
You've said good government should look like the people it serves. How far are we from that right now?
I mean, unfortunately, I think we're getting farther away from it. I think we were doing a good job for a second there, making some serious progress. Um, it's not, perfect, but we were having a lot of more women elected, for example, a lot more Black elected officials, a lot more AAPI elected officials, having, more progress with immigrants who are running for office and LGBT people who are running for office. We had, you know, it is more diverse now than it has been in the past. That is true. And it's also actively being wiped out by a lot of the like decisions being made right now. The attack on the Voting Rights Act. I mean, the um all of the like the redistricting that is wiping out, diverse elected officials in Congress. Things like the Save Act that are making genuine attempts to make it so like women can't vote. You're not going to, if you lose, if a constituency loses the right to vote, they're not going to be able to build enough power in order to uh, propel a proportionate number of themselves right into office. And so that is really scary. Um, but the one place where, like, even though the world is kind of falling apart, and by kind of, I mean um, that I feel really that keeps me optimistic is that even though it's never been perfect, the act of the promise of America and the like act of the Constitution itself was such a um gorgeous and beautiful and generous act of humanity. And yes, there were only, white straight slave owning property owning men or whatever in that room, but they actively created a document where they carved out some power from themselves and gave it to other people, right? They didn't have to do that. They could have created an oligarchy. They could have created any form of a monarchy, any form of government they wanted that guaranteed themselves generational, like, unilateral power for over everybody, and we'd be in a very different situation. But they carved off a slice of themselves and gave it to other people. And we have been slowly and steadily doing that as a nation throughout the history of our country, 250 years now, and it is volatile and it is violent and it is messy. But we're pretty consistently making progress towards the, all men are created equal being all people are created equal. And I do think that part is going to be okay. We're going to win in the end, assuming that we can do it before the planet implodes from climate change and eats us, or we lose the robot wars. Those two things are the things that I'm really like, the clock feels like it's running out a little bit, but without that, I think we like our better nature, our better angels are going to win in the end. And we're going to beat the oligarchs. We're going to have a government that is multiracial, multi-generational, ruled by the working class, and actually reflects the day-to-day reality of the people of the United States of America.
Oh, hi there. Do you live in Indiana? Are you watching this video? Come on in. I'm Blythe Potter. I'm running for Secretary of State. I'm a veteran, small business owner, a mom, and a lifelong Hoosier. I'm building a grassroots campaign focusing on talking to the people, not the establishment. So help me spread the message that Hoosiers deserve better from our elected officials. Oh, hey, before you go, introduce yourself in the comments and share this with a fellow Hoosier. Bye now.
Let's talk about fundraising, the least sexy and most unavoidable part of politics. Why does call time make so many candidates feel like they're selling their soul?
I mean, you hated it, didn't you?
Oh, I completely hated it.
Oh yeah, you raised $400, so clearly you hated it. Yeah, no, it's I think it has to do with people's money wounds. Honestly, like I think, um, everybody has one. We grew up in capitalism. Somebody you may have it around raising or around like asking for money. You may have it around spending money. You may have it around both. That's super healthy and going to work great in a campaign. But it is something that like in general, Americans don't have a healthy relationship with money. And we're taught like not to talk about it, not to ask about it. Like it is something that is deeply ingrained in us from childhood that like this is an inappropriate taboo topic. And so it's psychologically you start from a deficit. And I think that that's really tough for people. I think it's also really hard to reframe it in your mind as like you're not asking for money for yourself, you're asking for money for the movement, you're asking for money for something bigger. The other thing that people need to keep in mind is that fundraising is the antidote to the oligarchs. Working class people cannot buy these seats. They can't just, they can't Mike Bloomberg their way in there and just cut a check to buy the mayor's office or whatever. They can't do it. So the only way to do it is essentially crowdfunding, right? The resources necessary to get the walk pieces, to get the mail pieces, to get the digital ads, to have the communication with the voters. That is necessary to get your name out there, to get your message out there, and to, make sure that you can be, that you have a shot at being victorious. And so I think that it helps when people reframe it a bit as like a group crowdfunding project to go against the fascists rather than like just begging for money. But it's painful. The other piece is like fundraising is very it requires discipline. It's not necessarily difficult from a strategic perspective, although I'm not saying there's no fundraising strategy. It does exist and I'm very good at it, but it is more than anything else. It's a numbers game. It's hard because the same way going to the gym is hard, because getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and doing those reps when you're already sore is really difficult. And when you skip the day, you're going to lose the progress that you made, and you get the cheat meal and you lose the progress that you made. And like those kinds of things, are difficult to stick with. In general, the idea that like you have to make, 100 phone calls a day or whatever it is that you need to hit your numbers is just really difficult to like be disciplined about, especially because a lot of times you don't see progress from first time candidates because they don't have the relationships with the big donors, and they think well, obviously the seat should sell itself. It doesn't. It never does. There's also a lot of people who are doing it wrong and just making it harder on themselves than it needs to be. And that makes it miserable because sucks to do something you're already uncomfortable with and not make any progress whatsoever. It also brings out like the absolute unorganized chaos monster in a lot of candidates. And so, that can make it kind of a mess, but it's, I mean, I don't know. Look, candidates hate fundraising is like a tale as old as time. But it is not this like impossible beast that people build up to be in their heads. And frankly, doing so um, is really just surrendering some of your autonomy and surrendering a level of defeat to like the oligarchs and the fascists, because they don't have to do it to that extent. And they don't have to do it the hard way, right? When they do it, they get to call up their lobbyist friends and say, hey, I need $500,000. And then they bring in these big checks from big pharma and big data and big tobacco and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, you're going to make 500, for every 10 calls you make, you might raise $50, $5 sometimes. And like it's difficult and it can be deflating, and it's not in human nature to get rejected all the time and keep doing the thing. It also makes them feel bad about the campaign. Candidates want to do the things that make them feel good about the momentum of the campaign. And that's the showing up in the rooms, that's the social media posts, that's the things that like give instant gratification, versus being able to sit in this rejection and also be able to like disassociate from it enough to realize that it doesn't mean the campaign is failing. And it's hard. Like I'm not judging anybody for hating it. It is hard to do. I've been doing it since 2015, and I don't love it all the time. But it is until further notice, a necessary evil.
How much damage has consultant culture done to modern democratic politics?
Oh
And
my
where do you
God.
and where do you think the party keeps getting it wrong?
Oh my God. Okay. This is like, man, I didn't. I could teach a class on this. Okay, so one thing that people need to understand about politics and money in politics is that it is a lot bigger than lobbying, and it's a lot bigger than Citizens United. There is a political industrial complex. There is an entire industry of professional people who have a vested interest in the outcome of campaigns. Now, it's not every campaign. There are some 500,000 elected races across this country, and most of them cannot afford consultants. But it is like all the big ones that you see has not only the consultant, but probably some pollsters, opposition researchers, printers, TV buyers. Like there's this entire industry of people that we work with that do all of this work behind the scenes that y'all don't see. And it just like shows up at yard signs after Labor Day. And you're like, oh my God, it's election day. And we've been doing this shit for 2 years. Right. And so those people, they are largely unregulated. They are unelected. We work in the shadows. I say they, like I'm not one of them. And it is potentially dangerous in some situations, right? Like there is a level of access that we have to elected officials, to big money, and to just power in general, where we can set an agenda long before the public ever sees it and know who gets to say otherwise. I think it's a huge, huge problem. It also has created a situation where politics is essentially a mass media industry at this point. It's not retail politics anymore. It's not conversations with people and like actually hearing and listening to the voters about what they need. Evidence of that is really obvious. The polls about healthcare, the polls about climate action, the polls about gun reform, poll after poll after poll, issue after issue after issue. The American people want X, they get Y. That disconnect is in no small part because campaigns are no longer built to listen to people, and built to meet people where they're at. They're built to be created off of the back of a poll that somebody wrote to get the results that they already knew they wanted so that they could justify it, fundraise off of it, and then do a $1 million ad buy that to shout at you for 6 weeks about what they already thought was important and try to convince you that, that's what needs to happen. It's also the reason why everybody thinks the presidential race is the big sexy race. It's not because it's the race that actually has the most influence on your day-to-day life. It's because it's the race that makes the consultants the most money. So it's the race that you hear about the most. And so I think that is, for more reasons than I can even say, a massive, massive problem and very damaging to politics. And it's part of why I've started doing these interviews and trying to speak out a little bit. I think it's the journalist in me kind of taking over and being like, the public needs to know. Like, am I complicit in this system? Absolutely. I make money off of elections, but the public needs to know. Because just because I try my damnedest to make, all the decisions I can with integrity doesn't mean everybody does. Just because I don't think I'm a supervillain doesn't mean I'm not a supervillain. All the supervillains don't think they're supervillains, like it is something where there is something very shadowy and complex behind the scenes that the voters don't understand, and it is not as simple as your 6th grade civics, like 3 branches of government, and it is not as simple as like overturn Citizens United. It's much more complicated than that. As far as what we could do to try to reverse the trend, I have a pipe dream. Is gonna sound nuts, okay? Starting there. But my pipe dream is that we flip the entire system of how we fund elections upside down, and how we message elections and recruit candidates and support campaigns from the presidential level down to the local level. Because it would be cheaper by like a large margin. You would have people gathering, like out talking to people and gathering data and listening to folks who actually understand their day-to-day lived reality. The truth of the matter is there is no one message on any issue in the United States of America. It's not possible. We don't have a messaging problem. We have a problem with the fact that we think there's a message. This country is so fucking big. You cannot talk about it should be like 50 countries, right? Like it's not, it's too big. And so you can't talk about healthcare, for example, the same way in a city that has a state-of-the-art, university healthcare system as you do in a county where you have to drive 2 hours to get to the emergency room. It's not the same conversation. It might be the same issue, but it's not the same conversation. And part of the disconnect is the fact that like we aren't having those nuances. And so when you try to do this one big umbrella message, one big umbrella platform, one big umbrella campaign, you're trying to please everybody. And what ends up happening is nobody sees themselves represented in that campaign. And we could solve that by, instead of funding the DNC, funding the county parties, and then going backwards, feeding the data up from the county parties and their local races. It's called reverse coattails. Nobody is going to go out to vote for city council and skip the president's race, right? Like that's not what's going to happen. So that is my giant pipe dream, is just to fundamentally change and flip on its head how we fund and support campaigns. Will it happen? Who knows? Is it what I think we need in order to get back to a place where like the voters feel any semblance of heard? Yes.
You've been blunt about the fact that rural voters often feel abandoned by Democrats. Do progressives actually understand rural America, or do they just campaign there every 2 to 4 years?
I mean, I think it depends on the progressive, right? I don't think that there's any like single large swath thing that you can say one way or the other. But the rural urban divide is real. And it is a place where both sides have their blinders on. And I'm really lucky because I think part of what makes me good at this is the fact that I have done both, right? I was born in a town that was literally a single stoplight in rural Louisiana, an unincorporated area. The closest neighbor was a horse farm. I grew up in a county, the whole county had 10 stoplights. But because I moved from that tiny, tiny town to like the other little town and it had sidewalks, I was like, must be New York. And then from there I went to Knoxville, Tennessee, and then San Diego, and I'm now in Richmond, Virginia. So I've done the like rural, urban, mid-sized city situation. I don't do suburbs. That's like my one. I don't do that. But suburban voters, I don't know. But the reality is like, it is both sides are right and both sides are wrong. there is some very real legitimacy to the fact that like urban areas are where the people live, and democracy is one person, one vote, not 1 acre, one vote. And you should be, you should be trying to protect the most people at for, you know, every time, doing the most amount of good for as many people as possible. And a lot of times that means acting in urban areas because you get the highest ROI. And there are these huge communities, large swaths of land that have just been completely abandoned. As a system, we allowed domestic imperialism, where we had these companies, these coal companies, these lumber companies, these car companies, whatever it is, come in, drain these areas of their resources, keep the profit for themselves, export it out, and then leave everybody behind. And when you don't see any investment, you feel like you got screwed and you've been left behind generation after generation. Why the hell should you trust the party that says government does a good job? Why should you do that? And there's a sentiment of like coastal elitism or urban elitism that I think is just like, actually, we've spoken to people and you should calm down a little bit. But there's also a lot of oh man, the moments I got the most angry living in Southern California were when some kind of tragedy would happen in like the Midwest or the South, and I would hear the chatter about, well, these people got what they voted for. You know what? Fuck you. No, they didn't. And a lot of these areas, by the way, they are gerrymandered like crazy. The South is not red, it is oppressed. I would say the same thing about many Midwestern states. They have been living in fascist governments for a decade or more, longer than the United States. We're just the federal government, we're just noticing now. And the system has been rigged. People have been purposely made less healthy and less educated over time. And we could all do ourselves and our democracy a favor by like taking a deep breath and understanding that the person who lives a different life than you is not necessarily the enemy. We have a common enemy, and that is, the corporations and the oligarchs that are draining everybody of their resources and turning us against each other. Do progressives understand that? No. But I think that is also true in the inner cities. I don't think it's one of the things about like that media coverage that annoyed me. I said what I said, I meant what I said. No problem. However, it is also true for inner cities, right? Those areas are also abandoned. Those areas have also been sabotaged by the government. They have more in common in like an inner city, like uh neighborhood that has been disinvested from, and all of these people have been like redlined into it and forced into these areas, and like a trailer park in the county I grew up in, than they will ever understand. And it is not just that rural voters have been left behind. It is that human beings have been left behind in this system for way too long.
What's the hardest truth candidates need to hear before they decide to run for office?
It's going to suck. It's a shitty process. And you're not nearly as popular as you think you are. You're going to lose friends that you thought had your back. You're going to make friends that you never knew existed. And it is going to change your life forever.
For someone watching right now who feels called to run, but thinks politics belongs to somebody else, what do you tell them?
Well, Donald Trump is a 2-time elected president of the United States, and he's a fucking moron. So, I don't think you should surrender that territory to anybody. There's no reason to not give it a shot.
Eva, advocate interviews are different here. This isn't about campaign slogans or election year rehearsed answers. This is about the infrastructure underneath democracy, the people building it, protecting it, and sometimes dragging it uphill with both hands. And frankly, that work deserves more attention because candidates may be the face of the fight, but operatives, organizers, and strategists are often the spine. What I respect most about your work is that you're not selling fantasy. You're talking about the hard part, the donor calls, the losses, the burnout, the fact that democracy is often held together by over-caffeinated people on laptops at midnight trying to stop the whole thing from catching fire. That honesty matters because too many people look at politics and assume they don't belong there. They think they need permission, connections, a Rolodex, some mythical perfect resume. But real change usually starts with people who are a little stubborn, a little tired, just a little unwilling to accept that broken systems are permanent. That's where movements begin. And for those of us building media, building campaigns, building coalitions, those conversations matter. So thank you for helping train the next generation of people willing to do that work. And to everyone watching and listening here in Indiana, across the country, and to our loyal audience following from Europe, democracy is not self-cleaning. It requires organizers, strategists, advocates, and people willing to learn the rules well enough to change them. Because power never volunteers to be accountable. It has to be made accountable. So stay informed, ask questions, and as always, hold them accountable.